One. Hey guys, Erica Saccoccio with the Child Care Directors Chair podcast. Thank you for tuning in today. We are joined with the fellow podcaster and author Rob Macleod from the Reinventing Education YouTube channel and podcast. I really loved connecting with Rob because he talks a lot about leadership. And if you listen to this podcast, you know that is my jam. So we're going to talk today a little bit about your leadership style, whether you're a coach, a counselor, an expert. We're going to unlock the right approach so that you have school success for the center that you are running. So welcome to the show, Rob.
Thank you so much, Erica. Really glad to be here.
Yeah. So tell folks a little bit about your background in education.
Yeah, so as we were just saying, I'm a bit of a baby. I'm 15 years into being in schools. I've worked in different countries. I started in Canada, then in Germany, and then in Belgium. I've taught every single grade from junior kindergarten to grade 12 advanced courses throughout my career. And I've worked in all those kinds of roles like curriculum coordinator, instructional coach, and even head of a middle school. For a period. So I've had lots of experience in the classroom, lots of leadership experience, and experience as well in the public, private, and international school systems. So I've really gotten around to see education in schools from a multiple of perspectives.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool how you've had that opportunity to, as you said, through different countries. Not an experience that I have because I don't leave more than 10 miles from my home. So that's a little bit of a lie. But yeah, so what made you really dive into this topic of, these three different types of school models?
Well, I'm one of those people who is always interested in like developing, growing, refining the things that are happening in schools. And it always seemed that when I changed schools, I just happened to end up in a new school that was looking to change something, looking to develop something, looking to improve something. And I started to notice a diversity of approaches. I noticed very different leadership styles. And just throughout my own career, I started off as a very passionate educator. I was very lucky to be in schools that I was a really good match for. And then at some point in my career, I changed schools and ended up in a school I wasn't a match for. And it was puzzling to me to see that the school, its culture, its practices, the way it was doing things didn't align for me, or I didn't align with them, but it was working for other people on staff. And that was really puzzling to me. So I took what I was seeing around me and connected it to some developmental theories talking about different types of organizations, more so from the business perspective or like NGO world. But I took those lessons and applied them to schools and started to see that there were these three very distinct answers or ideas about how to do school well. And this impacted everything from the leadership level to the staff level, but also to the student and parent level, to realize that there were these three very distinct ideas about what it means to do a school well. And at the core of it was relationships. And I realized, like, I've started to use these terms to describe the three, the expert, coach, and counselor school. And I talk about expert, coach, and counselor leaders, expert, coach, and counselor teachers, and then also parents and students who prefer either the expert, coach, or counselor approach. They're more in alignment with it or not. And what works for one of these types works against the other two types. And I just noticed there was so much friction in our schools about where are we going, what are we doing, how are we going to get there. And I'm sure it's the same in early childhood care, but it feels like you've been in a school long enough, you see it go one direction, and then not too long into the future, you start going the opposite direction, and then you're back to where you started. And I was just noticing how much wasted potential there was in our systems by not having a name to name these different approaches. And once I saw this, it's kind of like I couldn't unsee it. This notion that there are these three very distinct value systems in education and in schools.
Yeah. It's funny because we often, I'm a parent, and we often, look at schools like what's the best fit for our children. right? And we may say, do I want a play-based school? Do I want a Montessori school? Do I want a Reggio school? But as an educator, I don't know that we always think about, what is the right fit for me where I can thrive, right? We definitely do that when we're looking at the lens of children. But and even as as an administrator, I don't know that I've ever asked my question to myself and said, what are the values of this? Not so much the values, but what's the style of leadership? Because I think I've always asked the question about values, but what's the style of leadership and what does that mean for me? And will I thrive here? I don't know that that's a question that many educators ask themselves.
Yeah, and well, that's a very important point because just like we kind of approach school as though it's this one thing we could be doing better and better, that's the way discussions around school leadership go too. It's kind of like, okay, well, here's the thing you need to be doing now. Oh, start doing this, stop doing that. Oh, here are the 3 new things leaders need to do. And the way I would boil it down to make distinctions for a leader listening right now is find out if you're expert leaning, coach leaning, or counselor. And to me, the first 2 simple places to answer that are, which of these 3 do you want for yourself and for your staff? Do you want a clear hierarchy? That would be an expert. So clear hierarchy. And I use the image of like a pyramid to say,
Sure.
There's decision making is concentrated at the top of the pyramid.
Uh-huh.
I can see your smile.
My listeners already know where I stand on that. But go ahead.
So the first one is a clear hierarchy, the pyramid. That's the expert. Second is the coach, which is more of a star shape. And this is where you have a layered hierarchy. So it's kind of like that pyramid of the expert kind of like shrinks a bit and fans out and creates different layers of hierarchy. Now that decision-making is spread across the staff. Now, there's still a hierarchy where there are some roles and positions towards the top that will still have more say than those below them. But more of the decision-making has been handed over across the staff, and it's a layered hierarchy. And then the final one is the counselor, which I use a circle to describe, and this is a flattened hierarchy. Sometimes a more democratic, or even it's called a sociocratic approach, where literally every voice from head of school, staff, and students and parents is equal, and there is no hierarchy, and it's about finding group consensus towards things. And just even introducing that idea, I find for a lot of leaders goes, oh, I never, like you said, I've never actually stopped to think about which one of these am I wanting? This clear hierarchy, this layered hierarchy, or this flattened hierarchy? And then to match those, there's just like 3 very different approaches to working as a staff in education. And those are either autonomy, collaboration, or negotiation. So with that pyramid of the expert, people want autonomy. It's like, hey, hire good people, get out of their way. Like, trust the people unless they prove otherwise. Give them the autonomy to do what's best with the people they're working with. The second one, the coach, wants to work with collaboration. And they say, no, let's put all the pieces, all of us on staff together to make a team that's bigger than any one of its parts. We've got a school, like shared school-wide approach to doing things here. Let's collaborate. And all of our decisions for our teaching are based together, like staff decisions on what should be happening. And then the third and final one is the counselor, which says, no, let's use negotiation. We're going to talk with each student or each person that we're working with and create a individualized, customized plan for what it is they're wanting to learn, how they're going to learn, and we make decisions that way. So it's like, how are you making decisions in the room with the people you're working with? Is it autonomy? Is it collaboration that's informing those decisions? Or is it negotiation? And again, just pointing that out, like most educators I speak to, they go like, oh yeah, I know that, but I have never tried to put words to that. And by not having the words for this, or I guess I put it the positive way, by having words for this, we're engaging with something that's already there. Like every educator I've talked to is either like, yep, autonomy, yep, collaboration, or yep, negotiation. that's already there. This isn't something new I'm asking people to start doing in their practice. I'm just pointing out what's already there.
Yeah.
And whether we engage with it or not, or whether we name it or not, it's still impacting every conversation, every decision that's going on in the school. So it's like, might as well name this, might as well put it on the table and address it, because it's already pulling the strings in every education-based organization I know. So I've kind of rambled. It's a little bit abstract there at this point, but I'm curious in the childcare world if some of this rings true for you.
Yeah, I think, I think how your school is funded also might play a little piece into how much authority, autonomy, collaboration you can do. Because if you're funded by grants, there are certain expectations and little check boxes that you kind of have to tick off that kind of goes with, having access to that money. I also think if you are a for-profit center, at the end of the day, somebody has to make the budget decisions. Because I would love to say to all of my staff, all the kids, all the parents, what new piece of playground equipment do we want that's $250,000? But at the end of the day, somebody has to make some decisions. Where are we going to cut and all of those things to make that happen? So I do think funding plays a little piece into how flexible you can go with certain aspects of, feedback. But for the most part, I think what you're saying is very true. And it's going to be contingent on who the owner is of the school and who the director is. So I don't think it really changes when you get down to the early learning programs. For myself, I feel like the coaching, I'm somewhere between a coach and a counselor. I would say probably if I really had to really dial it down, probably more of a coach. I think that, I think leaders grow other leaders. So if everything is at the top, you're not growing anybody, which means you're not really truly a leader. That's just my opinion. I know, like you said, one's not better than the other. That's just my feelings of if you make every decision and everything has to run through you, then how are other people getting the opportunities to really make those decisions and hone their skills? And people are going to mess up. They're people. But that's how we grow, right? That's what we tell kids, right? Mistakes are growth. But when it comes to adults, it's like, you're not allowed to make a mistake, which is silly.
Spoken like a true coach, Erica.
Yeah, Let me ask you. So as administrators, how can they assess their leadership style and then refine their skills to amplify their presence? Because you said you're either one or the other. To truly be good at it, you got to kind of go all in and really dial down to your style. So where do people start? How do they do that?
Yeah, great question. So I would actually go back to what you were just saying before this, when you talked about funding, might be a factor that influences which of these three. So sure. I'll come back to the personal side of the leader in a second. But first, one word I haven't addressed yet is this idea of context. And I talk about this with schools, in particular with school leaders, is to say, as you said, the three of these, there's not one that's better than the other three. All three of these can be done well and really serve the people that we work with, serve the students in one of these three roles. However, there is one that will be best for your context. And what your context means, I've put together a list of about 50 things that you would need to consider, and definitely funding is on that list. Okay. So there are 50 things to figure out, well, given who our students are or the communities that we're working with, which of these three, the expert, coach, or counselor, is the best fit overall for our school to be? And schools do better when they choose one of these and really own it and do it well. Because when a school's caught in a tug of war between them, then none of them get to shine. You get a watered down version of all three. And a watered down version of all three doesn't work for the people involved. Because if you are truly coach leaning, and like you said, you believe in people developing, the idea of, we can make mistakes here as long as we're growing, as long as we're proving that we're doing better in the big picture, that matters. Well, but if you only do that by a third, and you're also trying to kind of accomplish that sense of what the expert wants and what the counselor wants, no one ends up happy. So it's better to do one do it well, and not be caught in a tug of war between them. So how does a leader ensure that they do that? Well, there's kind of a two-part question. And the first one is, which of these three types is the best for your school's context? And then the second question is, are you as a leader a match with that type that's best for this context? And then a leader has this delicate decision to say, okay, good. I am in alignment. My type matches the type that's the best for this school. And that's not just coming from me, because I will always assume my type is best. You know, if I'm coach leaning, I'm going to walk into any environment and go, well, we could use some more coach approaches here. You know, we need more of this. So the leader needs to check themselves and say, am I actually a match for what's the best for this context? Taking in, these 50 or more factors into consideration. If they are, great. That's the easiest position for a leader to be in. You're in alignment with what your community needs. And, in my book, I talk about kind of 4 pillars for each of the 3 types. Like, these are the 4 things you really need to get right. And if you get these right, everything else will kind of build on these 4 pillars for your type. If you're not a match as a leader, so let's say you and I are coach leaders and we walk into an environment that actually the expert approach or the counselor would be the better fit, then we, with these ideas, can kind of step out of ourselves for a bit to say, okay, I know this would be my go-to, but I'm willing to support what's needed here for the expert or the counselor. However, to me, that's something you can do temporarily, but to me, that's not a long-term solution for a leader. To me, I would really highly recommend leaders know their type and then find environments that need to be served by that type for a variety of reasons. But the one I always come back to is, the more I talk to leaders, to teachers, educators, once they know their type, they realize that all the work that we do feels like they're contributing meaningfully when they're able to contribute as their type. Because we're all putting in a lot of hours, we're all putting in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, we're all putting in a lot of care. But if we're putting in all that effort and it's kind of going against our internal values or a sense of what we should be doing with the people we're working with, it is a constant friction or kind of like a low-level hum that wears you down over time. Yeah. Whereas when I look back in my career to the phases where I felt I was really contributing and I was really a match and I was loving the schools I was in and felt like I don't mind putting in these extra hours because, all this great stuff's happening because of it. When I dig down, it was really just because I was in alignment with the school. And it was like, yeah, what I'm doing feels meaningful. I'm contributing meaningfully in what I'm doing. And if you don't have that alignment, I think you can do it for a while, but it's not sustainable long term. So that's what I would say to leaders. Find out which of these 3 you're in alignment with.
Yeah. I think too, not just from the leadership perspective, but I also feel like from the teacher perspective, I've had times where I've had teams and they have worked extraordinarily well together. And then, maybe 1 or 2 people from that group leaves, and then you get 2 new people, and then it's not quite the same. Even though your culture hasn't changed, your leadership style hasn't changed. But like you said, that finding that that sync, making sure that the folks that are within that school culture are all kind of synced up too, because that also matters, not just your style, but the folks that you're working with.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that relational realm of communication, the more and more I've dug into this idea of these 3 types, I really just see almost every conversation I have now in a school really just being someone trying to use words to amplify their expert values or amplify their coach values or amplify their counselor values. And kind of the shorthand word I put for these 3 is if a student or the people we work with was to leave your class or your environment, which of these 3 would be your priority to make sure that they left with? And I say it's responsibility, achievement, or meaning. For the expert, it's the sense of, when you leave here, you're more responsible than when you came in. For the coach, it's when you leave here, you can achieve more than when you came in. And for the counselor, it's when you leave here, you've got more sense of meaning than when you came in. And there was something you'd mentioned earlier about like, which do we prioritize or which do we sacrifice? I forget exactly how you said it, but, obviously any educator values responsibility, achievement, and meaning. I'm not pretending if you value one, you don't care about the other two. Of course, all three matter. But there's one that's always going to take like that gold medal spot on the podium that if you had to sacrifice the other two, you're going to hold on to this one. Or when times get hard, when the pressure's on, you're going to fight for this one and not allow it to be you're going to fight for one and not allow it to be diminished or minimized by the other two, by pursuing the other two.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's what I find at the bottom of every conversation is someone's really underneath their words just saying, okay, but responsibility matters here. Or, okay, but no, achievement. Or, no, meaning. I see you nodding. And
I'm laughing because as soon as you said, how people get to or feel more accomplished, like I'm laughing. I'm like, yeah, that's me. When you leave, I just want you to know, like, you can do things. You can do it. So yeah, I'm just laughing because immediately as soon as you said that, I'm like, yeah, that's me. You've got me pegged. I'm definitely that. I'm definitely that coach person. So, what are some practical steps for putting leadership styles into action to achieve positive outcomes for both the teachers and the students?
Yeah, well, I think I would say that the very first place to start is just to notice these and to be able to step away from the idea of different is wrong. Because so the expert, the coach, and the counselor are three different answers to the question of how do we do education well? And these are three competing, contradictory answers of how to do it. So as a leader, know your type, know which one you are leaning toward, and then begin to pick up on the cues from others of where are they coming from? Because it's really only then that you can avoid what I call unnecessary friction or unnecessary misunderstandings. Or I think all three types do this. We make this mistake where we know how we want things to be done. And for leaders, it's no different. We know how we want things to be done, but how we want things done for our type. And when we see someone else suggesting something that seems contradictory and, way out in left field or actively working against what we want, we see that difference as, oh, you're a really bad coach. Like, you don't know how to do this. When actually what they're talking about is how to be a really good expert or a really good counselor. And once you can see this, it's an advantage for two reasons. One, you can actually talk to people because you begin to feel and sense underneath those words and underneath the suggestions they're offering to really see what matters to them. And I tie it back to that idea of they're just trying to contribute meaningfully. And either they're in an environment that's supportive of the way they want to contribute, or they're misaligned with the kind of overall expert coach or counselor approach of this place. So for the leaders to identify which of these three types are we trying to do, and across the staff, who is already in alignment with this and who's not. And to take it to the next step of how do you, as a leader, bring people in? To me, this, in the future, it would be my dream if on every job application or every job description, it said hey, we're hiring experts, or we are hiring coaches, or we're hiring counselors. We're an expert institution. We're a coach institution. We're a counselor institution. And I make the analogy sometimes if you plant an acorn, you're going to get an oak. And you can take that acorn and put it at the base of a grapevine trellis. And as it's growing, you can try and force it on that trellis and it'll stretch, it'll do this, but it's still going to be an oak. And you're much better off. If you want oaks, go get oaks. And if you want grapevines, go get grapevines. Because otherwise you're just going to end up with oaks in your vineyard, or you're going to end up, with vines crawling up your forest. So knowing your type, naming it, and then being able to like actively attract people who are in alignment with that, I think is kind of like the cheat code for leaders, I would say. And for the people who are not in alignment, just recognize that and see that different isn't wrong. They're just trying to contribute meaningfully in a different way.
Yeah. It's funny you say about on the application because when you started talking, I was thinking, I often will ask folks on an interview, tell me about your last boss. What did you like about the way they led you? What didn't you like? So I guess I didn't realize I was doing it quite to that level. Probably was unintentional. Just I wanted to know for my own, like, is this somebody that I can work with? Is this somebody who's going to enjoy working here, working with me? So I do ask, some questions around that when I'm interviewing. So you had said you have worked in multiple age levels, even running a school yourself. So I want to ask you a question. Can you share a time when you had to shift your leadership style approach between either a coach and a counselor or an expert based on a situation or challenge?
Oh, great question. Yes, I've got about 1,000 daily instances of this. Well, what are some of the best examples? Oh, I love this question. And I wish I would have taken a moment ahead of time to have sorted, to have one just ready on the tip of my tongue. Well, I suppose one example is one of my previous schools was much more coach aligned. And it was really interesting because we'd introduced this idea of a school-wide shared approach to the teaching of reading and writing. And this was, from the earliest grades to the highest grades. Every staff member was being trained on it. The idea being that whether you were in, if we were both grade 3 teachers, for example, whether you're in Rob's class or Erica's class, basically the same approaches to feedback, the same lesson format, all these kinds of things were taking place. That worked fairly well at that school because it was much more coach leaning. And I had one of those aha moments where I switched schools. The school was looking for a new approach to reading and writing. And I said, hey, at my previous school, we had done this and it went really well. The new school that I was at was much more expert leaning, and they weren't looking for that collaboration. Now, of course, a few staff members were for sure, but overall, I described like the center of gravity was pulling the school in like an expert direction where they're really wanting autonomy. And it was fascinating to me. It felt like a failure at first because people seemed to be on board with this new idea. But then once the rollout happened and once things started going to the classroom, there wasn't a shared approach. There were 30 autonomous approaches to this approach. There wasn't that shared buy-in. And if you went to expert Erica's class and expert Rob's class in the school, these didn't look the same. We weren't in that kind of coherence of creating this school-wide approach. And for me, that was actually kind of the beginning of this journey of seeing this idea of the 3 types. And what I realized in that moment, and I didn't have the skills for it or even the words for it quite yet, was like, oh, I think the shift to make here is not to keep forcing this collaboration that they don't want, but rather we're seeing 30 different autonomous kind of unique expressions of this approach. How about I get to these classrooms and just see what they are doing and what's going well and what's not? And rather than trying to bring this uniformity or kind of vertical and horizontal coherence between grades and classes, what if I just try and make each expert a better expert? And just, I'm starting to use those coach words, but develop them as experts. Yeah. And that was the shift that seemed needed, because I think pursuing the collaboration would have been a dead-end road, could throw a lot more time, resources, attention into it, but that's not what people were buying into. It was, okay, yeah, here's a new approach. It's not what I was doing, but I can make that my own. And it was that expert approach. And it was like, well, you know what? The center of gravity here is already expert. Rather than fight the current, let's go with that and let's do that well.
So, what's your favorite style? You're going to get asked that a lot, so make sure that you're on the record.
So, I have a trick answer for that.
Okay.
And that is, I talk about the 3 types of school because I think this is the most important thing for us in education now to address, like I said, what's already in our schools now and to put words to it and so we can engage with it. When I look to the horizon, I actually see the potential for a 4th type of school. So I'll go on record and say that I'm the 4th type.
Okay.
So we've had expert, coach, and counselor, and I call the 4th type a facilitator type. And this facilitator is willing to be flexible between the 3. And so in the book that I'm writing, I throw this at the end because I kind of make this case that, there are these 3. It's best to do one. Find your context. One will be the best fit. I still think that's the best first piece of advice. And I think that's something that schools can actually do without having to reinvent the wheel and completely change staffing and change funding and change timetables and change how we're using spaces. That's something that I do feel is tangible and that schools could begin to do. To me, the kind of bigger picture, slightly, hey, Rob, you're a wild hippie with big ideas step is to say, when you get digging into your context, you will find one of the 3 that is the best fit for your context. Mm-hmm. But as soon as you start to dig deeper, there's still going to be a diversity of those 3 types, either represented in your staff, whether or not you start hiring intentionally or not. Yeah. But more so, I've been in enough classrooms and I've seen students change schools and change classrooms. And I'm also of the belief that students are in alignment with one of these 3 roles more than the others. And there are kids I've seen who've not been thriving when they've been in a school that has one approach. They switch schools to another type and they begin thriving. And unfortunately, I've seen the opposite too, where they were thriving with one type. They changed to another type of school. And that role that the teacher is having for them, or the role that the school is playing, expert, coach, or counselor, it's either it is a match or it isn't for them. And we can see this year to year too, when we see students with certain teachers who exemplify either expert, coach, and counselor. And there's some teachers kids click with and some they don't. Now, of course, there are other factors. There's personality. There's a million other things too, but I do see this as part of it. And I would say the big picture, and which of these am I? I'd say the facilitator, because I can see the gifts that all 3 of these can have for students. And I do see them each making meaningful contributions. Now, there are a lot more moving pieces in the idea of how would you offer a facilitator school, but I offer 3 suggestions for it in the book, which maybe I can give you kind of a quick Coles Notes of each of the 3, but go into more details there. But basically, the first step is just to say, hey, teachers, you're one of these, own it, and to the degree you can, be flexible to offer a bit of the other 2 intentionally. And that's kind of like step 1 of the facilitator, to say, like, we're not asking a coach to become an expert. We're not asking a coach to be a counselor. Be the one you are, but just make sure you can like turn up the volume on those other 2 from time to time, to kind of to hit the bandwidth of everybody. Yeah. The next step would be to say, and I know this is big sky thinking, but hey, let's figure out what type each teacher is, and let's find out which type each student aligns with best. And to the degree that we can, and again, I know size of school, staffing, all these things come into play.
Gonna match them up.
Exactly. To the degree that we can we match them up? And then the third and kind of most extreme and most moving parts, and I can actually point to at least one or a handful of schools that are actually doing this, that are applying this. Now, they've come at it from a slightly different angle than I have, but they're actually saying on the subject level, there's a chance, and well, not a chance, but they've seen that, you know what, when it comes to like math, this student learns better from a counselor approach. But when it comes to art, they thrive much more with a coach. And when it comes to languages, they're doing better with an expert. And I can point to a few schools that are actually custom tailoring subject by subject
That's cool.
the match between staff and students. Now, like I said, that's many more moving parts.
Sure.
There are many more potentials for things to go right, but when you get more moving parts, there's also more ways things can go wrong too. So that's the one I'm interested in long term. This idea of being able to offer all three intentionally in a school. Whereas to me, most schools now are offering all three, but unintentionally and caught in a tug of war. I'd love to see us moving intentionally to include all three of these in our schools.
You know, Rob, I think that will solve some challenges that are going on in education. One of the things I think would be really cool if that would be something that schools could put in place, maybe you would have less teachers leaving the field, right? Because it would seem like it would be more enjoyable to work with students where you kind of jive. Relationships are everything. I mean, that's, you've said that twice, but relationships are everything when it comes to working with people in general. Big people, little people. That doesn't change. Relationships are everything. But yeah, I think, that might also just bring a little bit more joy back to educators, because educators, they're in a difficult place right now. That's honest to that, they're in a difficult place. So as we start to wrap it up, is there anything that I didn't ask you yet that you think is really important that you'd like to leave for the listeners?
I appreciate you asking that. I think we've touched on, this has kind of been a good appetizer into the ideas that I'm trying to share. But just to build off your last point, there are a lot of things in education for sure that are making this job a challenge these days for sure. And I suppose what I'm hoping to do with this work, like I said earlier, we're already putting all this work into it. Is there friction we can remove from schools? Is there friction we can remove from our organizations? And when there are things in place that are actively working against someone contributing meaningfully, that creates the conditions for burnout. It creates the conditions for quiet quitting. It creates those conditions like you're talking about of people just being like, this isn't for me anymore. I'm out of here. And I'm not pretending that this idea of the three types will solve everything, but I certainly do think it's a solution for a lot of problems in education.
Yeah.
And, that's how I wrote the book. It's got a bit of an R-rated title. I'll call it the PG version, just Schools That Give an F. Because I talked to so many passionate leaders, so many passionate educators, some who were thriving.
Yep.
And, it's not everything is doom and gloom. And that's important to remember too. There are schools, organizations that are crushing it. And to me, when you talk to them, why are they thriving? They stumbled upon this alignment, whether they had words for it or not. Yeah. And they're carrying it out. I'm trying to give you the recipe for what those places are doing when they maybe can't quite describe it themselves. They can tell you what they're up to.
Sure.
But they're maybe not getting at that more foundational level of talking about that alignment. They'll still be on that kind of surface level of the words, but not really sharing this kind of core idea of alignment. So there are places out there that are doing well, but for the ones that are facing those challenges and the struggles, I think this at least attempts to remove that friction by helping people see what's holding them back from contributing meaningfully and finding places, practices, cultures that help them align with that. And, the reason I ended up going with this book title wasn't just some clickbaity, oh, he's swearing, tee-hee type of a thing, but it was the phrase that kept coming up from passionate educators and leaders being like, you know what? I don't want to work in a school where people don't give an F. That's the opposite of what we want. So if that's the opposite of what we want, why aren't we actively working to create places where staff can contribute meaningfully and feel like what they're doing is of service, is of value, and empowering people in that way? And that's what the book's attempting to do. And it's also serving to fill a role that even I needed. Despite a great start in my career, I did hit a point kind of midway, 3/4 through, where I wasn't in alignment with my school. I wasn't in alignment with the values.
Yep.
And, in the course of 1 year, I was ready to quit. I was looking to leave the school, looking to leave education as a whole. And I was shocked. And this isn't to speak ill of the people I spoke to, but, I talked to my union and they were basically like, well, do you want to leave? Here's the paperwork. Yeah. I talked to the wellness, team in my school, and it was like, well, here's a handout of sleeping habits and some stress management things. Go for it. And, talked to my school, and they're basically like, well, here's the paperwork to leave. And it was like, those are 3 things I could do, but those 3 things didn't address this core issue.
Yeah.
And it showed me that we were lacking this role of like, when you risk not giving a crap in schools, who do you go to? And right now that role doesn't exist. And until it does, I'm hoping that the work that I'm doing through the Instagram page, the YouTube talks that I'm doing, the book that's coming out, I'm hoping it's filling that role and actually making that a topic for conversation to say like, no, we need places that are actively supporting people who want to contribute meaningfully, which I did. But I wasn't finding the alignment even within the system to help me find that. Thankfully, I did get back in alignment. It did happen to even be in that same school due to a variety of changes. But until that is a role in our systems, and until it shows up on our agendas, like in meetings, like how are we going to contribute meaningfully? I guess I'll kind of keep beating this drum and just say that this is so critical.
That's one of the advantages and disadvantages of owning your own school. So the weeks that you're just like, that's it, I give up, I'm done. You really can't be done because you own the school. You can't just quit. So, you have to just suck it up, and then you figure out, and then, the next week is a new week. And also being able to make changes very quickly. I don't need a board. I don't need, all these people to make changes. And like, if this isn't working, we can literally change it the next day. So, so there's pros and cons of owning your own school. When does your book come out?
Good question. This keeps getting pushed into the future because I'm a first-time author, and this takes a lot longer than I realized.
Yes.
This summer is what I'm aiming for. There's a few back and forth still between my editor, but I will say at this point, summer 2025. Okay. The date will get specified soon. Awesome.
Okay. And so for folks to stay really early this morning, for folks to stay connected with you, you have an Instagram page.
Yeah. Instagram's an easy one, and YouTube. So Reinventing Education Podcast on Instagram, Reinventing Education Podcast on YouTube. And as well, reach out to us. We do have the podcast, Reinventing Education Podcast, found everywhere that you listen to podcasts. Yeah. Feel free to reach out.
I'll leave the links below and make it much easier for all my listeners. And folks will be able to catch me on your show pretty soon. So to my folks out there, thank you so much for listening. It's the small details that make a big impact on the success of your child care business. That's all for today. Have a good day. Bye.